Good morning and welcome to another online Sunday school class with Tunnel Hill Baptist Church. As always, we like to begin by reminding you that we here at Tunnel Hill Baptist Church believe that Jesus is the Christ, that He's the Son of the living God who lived a perfect life and died a sacrificial death for your sins and for mine, and that if you will place your hope and trust in Jesus Christ as both Lord and Savior, that you will be saved. If you'd like more information about what it means to make Jesus Christ your Lord and Savior, we invite you to follow the link in the description. That will take you to a full gospel presentation. It'll also show you how to respond to the gospel and connect with Tunnel Hill Baptist Church. If you live in the Hardin County, Kentucky area, we would invite you to join us for worship right here at 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings, both in person and online through Facebook Live. If you do not live in the Hardin County, Kentucky area, we still want to connect with you and help you find a Bible-believing church where you do live. We are wrapping up our study in the Gospel of John today, so we are going to be in session 13. Session 13 is titled, Do You Love Me? And we're going to be looking at John chapter 21, verses 15 through 23. Again, this is session 13, titled, Do You Love Me? And we're going to be looking at John chapter 21, verses 15 through 23. Do you remember growing up, and maybe it was elementary school, maybe it was middle school, but the kind of notes that sometimes people would send in order to kind of initiate a relationship with somebody, and it would be that classic line of do you like me, or do you want to go out, and check yes or no. Do you kind of remember those notes and what they were? And with that, do you remember kind of the both fear and anxiety and excitement that kind of went with that? Maybe you were the one sending the note, maybe you're the one that received the note, maybe you were just involved in the passing of the note and you knew people, and so you kind of said, hey, this is for you, and you knew what was going on, and you were kind of maybe that third person, but you were hoping for a certain outcome with that. You can kind of remember from those type of days or those type of events that there's a lot of risk and almost a lot of danger in letting people know how you feel about them, that you like them or that you're maybe attracted to them. And that leads the book to ask this question. It says, what makes asking someone about their love for you dangerous? And so you could be thinking maybe about it being a kid, or maybe it's as an adult, maybe telling someone that you love them or that you care about them very deeply as an adult. What makes that kind of feel or kind of seem dangerous? And when we ask questions during our study, what we're wanting you to do is we're wanting you to pause the video and really take some time to interact with those questions. If you're watching this by yourself, get a pen, paper, write some things down, take some time to interact with us. If you are watching this with your family or with your spouse or whomever, take a couple minutes, pause the video, and really discuss these things. And so here's what I want to have you do during this kind of first break or pause in our video to have this discussion. I want you to think of a time where maybe you mustered up the nerve to tell someone how you felt about them, and kind of, you don't have to give names or all that, but kind of tell them what you did and how that felt. And then along with that, answer this question: what makes asking someone how they feel about you so dangerous? Take a couple minutes, discuss that, and then we'll get rolling with our study. All right, so hopefully you've had a time to tell a story and answer that question. I like what the book says. It says that when we're talking about love, it can be tricky unless we are absolutely certain about the response. And I think that's a really good way to look at that. Is what makes it so dangerous is if you don't know how they're going to respond. Are they going to respond in the affirmative? Is this gonna be the end of the relationship? If it's leading to something like marriage, or is it leading to the end? These can be very, very complicated things. The book goes on to say this. It says, on the night of Jesus' arrest, Peter had denied Jesus 3 times. The experience devastated Peter and likely stuck with him even through the resurrection. But in today's verses, we are going to see how Jesus was not through with Peter just yet, and he wanted Peter to understand that as well. We are picking up in a part in this passage, if you've already opened your Bible to that, in verse 15, and we're really picking up at the end of a meal. But some very interesting things had happened prior to that. See, before we get to the passage that we're going to be studying today, we have had the resurrection experiences that have happened in Jerusalem. We've had the encouragement excuse me, the encouragement by Jesus to head to Galilee, and all of this is before Pentecost. And Peter and the disciples have returned home. They've returned to the Sea of Galilee. They're up in the Capernaum area where they're from originally. And in the midst of all this and having everything that has happened in Jerusalem and the resurrection and all this stuff happens, they find themselves in what I've always kind of talked about as a lull in the events. And because of that, Peter is waiting to go back to Pentecost. They're waiting for this kind of final resurrection moment, or the things at Pentecost, the empowering from on high type of stuff. And in the midst of all that, Peter says, well, I'm going to go fishing. And I like something the book kind of explains about it. It was that Peter was going to return to something familiar to kind of get his mind off of everything that's happening. It was a bit of an escape to him, I have to be honest. I do that type of stuff when I'm overwhelmed and I'm frustrated. I tend to return to something familiar. That may be reading a book that I'm very familiar with, doing a task that I'm very comfortable doing, whether that's doing something around the house or really mowing the yard can be an example of that for me, or just watching a movie that I've watched 1,000 times and just taking a couple minutes and doing something familiar to kind of just allow me the chance to rest and decompress. And that's exactly what Peter does. And so he goes fishing, and not only him, but several of the other disciples follow suit, may have all been at least familiar with that industry and fishing. And so they get in the boat and they go out fishing through the night, and they don't catch anything. As they get into the morning, they've caught nothing. They see a man from the shore call out to them. He challenges them to cast the nets over the other side of the boat, and in doing so, they have a massive catch. This leads them to the realization that the person standing at the shore is Jesus, while the disciples try to secure the boat and bring it back into shore. Peter actually jumps straight into the water and swims, coat and everything, to get to Jesus as quickly as possible. This leads to them discovering that not only is this Jesus, but Jesus is there with a meal prepared for them of some fish and other things, and they eat. And that's where we're going to come into our passage today. And so we're going to pick up in John 21, and we're going to start in verse 15 and read through to verse 17. And as we do so, I want you to listen for those key words or phrases related to Jesus' post-breakfast conversation. So let's pick up in verse 15. It says this. I actually need to turn the page here. It says this. It says, when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said to him, you know that I love you. Feed my lambs, he said to them. A second time, Jesus asked him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, he said to him, you know that I love you. Shepherd the sheep, he told them. In verse 17, he says, he asked them a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved that he had asked him a third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. So as we begin to look at this passage, we see a very interesting kind of theme coming up here. First off, we see the theme of Jesus asking Peter if he loves him. And if you think about that, there's some significance to all of that. And there's a slight variation to all of that as he goes through, probably giving us a progression of something that Jesus is trying to communicate to Peter. The first thing we notice in the passages is he says, Jesus, do you love me more than these? And this is always a hard thing for us as we're 2,000 years removed from when these events took place. And what are the these that he's talking about? Is he talking about the other disciples? One of the things the book points out is, Peter had been the one at the Last Supper who had said, well, if everybody else falls away, I won't fall away. Like, I love you more than everyone. I'm better. And so he may be giving a comparison. Do you still love me more than these people love me? That's very possible. He could have also been referring to the fish and the fisherman's lifestyle. And he could have been saying, do you love me more than these fish that you've caught and all that stuff? Are you willing to give this world up, put this behind you in order to follow me all the rest of your days? We really don't know, but what we can kind of gather from the passage is that Jesus is calling him to choose Jesus over something else, that there is something that he is calling Peter into a deeper follow and a deeper love for Jesus. And I think that's significant regardless of what he's actually talking about. Excuse me. And so the these of this passage, regardless of what it is a challenge to put Jesus at a deeper level, to create priority to Jesus. And I think Jesus could do that for us today, and he could ask us the same question today, and these could mean a lot of different things depending on who you are. It could mean if Jesus went to you today and said, do you love me more than these? He could be talking about your home. He could be talking about the things that you collect or the things you like. He could be talking about, automobiles. It could be talking about knickknacks and all the things that you fill your house with. It could be, being honest, it could be talking about your job. It could be talking about your kids and your family. It could be talking about so many things. And there's the question always that should be in our heart of, do we love Jesus more than the things of this world, the things that are going to just be here? And we have to answer that in the affirmative. In fact, to a degree, we need to say, even if Jesus looked at Tunnel Hill Baptist Church or whatever church you attend on Sunday mornings and said, do you love me more than this? Like, do you love Jesus more than even you love your church, in case God is moving you into a new worship place or maybe a new place entirely to go plant a new church? He's asking us constantly, do you love me more than the things of this world? And that's a big challenge, but I think it's something that we need to take very seriously. One of the interesting things about this passage is we get the word love. Do you love me more than these? You know I love you. Do you love me? You know that I love me. Do you love me? All things you know that I love me. And yet there's two different words for love that are existing here. Jesus gives the initial of the word love being agape, which is a love that he has used continually through the Gospels and through his ministry. It's a love that has something that Christianity has really kind of taken ownership of and made that to mean a very self-sacrificing love. Peter consistently responds with a different word for love, which is the word phileo, which is where we get like the word Philadelphia, and that comes with a more familial, brotherly love, loving in kind of that close sense. And there's a lot of speculation about if these two different kinds of love are showing that like God is calling him, or Jesus is calling Peter into a self-sacrificing, fully committed love, that love of taking up your cross and following him, and the only thing Peter's offering in return is a love of friendship, or a love of like, I care about you, I think you're a great guy. I'm not convinced. I'm going to take my position on this. I'm not convinced that that's the point. And I'll give you a couple reasons. One, because I don't think if that were the case, then it would almost be that Peter is failing that test. And if Peter's failing that test, then it kind of makes us, as we jump into Acts and as we jump into even Peter's own writings, it doesn't make sense. The other thing is this was probably written, or this is written in Greek, but it was probably initially spoken in Aramaic. And I don't think there's a very clear indicator whether different words were being used in the Aramaic. And so this is me talking, this is probably more of a style choice here. And it's not so much that the different words have a significant meaning that they're using, but rather it is the reality that Peter is being restored. And that comes from the reality of the 3 times. The book does ask the question, why did Jesus ask him? So it was essentially the same question 3 times. And the book says this, I like how they say it. It says, Peter had denied Jesus 3 times the night before his crucifixion. Many scholars believe that Jesus gave these 3 opportunities for Peter to affirm his love and his loyalty. And that's why I also don't think that ultimately we want to put too much into the fact that he used different words, because of the fact that if these 2 different words had a major significance, then it would have meant that Peter failed, that he would have failed the test, that he would have, and I would think that would mean his story was over. That if he was not going to love Jesus to the level that Jesus wanted him to, then the following commands of feed my lambs, tend my flock, tend my sheep, feed my sheep, wouldn't have really made sense. that this would have been like a failed moment, and Peter would be losing his role or his status as disciple, that he would remain in the state he was in when he denied Jesus. And ultimately, I would think that the book of Acts, and even the entire rest of the New Testament would be carry on without him. But that's not what happens. On the contrary, he affirms his love for Jesus 3 times, even at the end, finally saying, you know everything. You know my heart. You know all things. You're omniscient is what he's saying. You know that I love you. You know for a fact that I love you. Let me read this. It says, Jesus claimed to be the good shepherd in John 10:14, and he expects his followers to reflect his love to others. Peter was going to be a major figure in the early church, so Jesus needed him to understand that he would still be useful and that he had been restored. This leads the book to this question, which is, why do we easily think that if we have failed, then the Lord is no longer able to use us? And so that may have been where Peter was. That may have even understood the limitation of maybe the words there. He viewed himself as a failure who now had to deal with the resurrected Lord that he denied. How is it? And yet Jesus is clearly communicating to him that he has been restored, that he is being, in a sense, recommissioned to help lead the church forward. Why do we so easily think that when we make mistakes that the Lord can't use us anymore? Pause the video, take a couple minutes to discuss that, and then we'll start up into our next passage. This is a great question. It's one that I think is hard to answer. I'm sure for some there's an element of escape there. Maybe they have been, they feel that burden. They know that they should be doing something. And so when they make those mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes, they view those as an exit. I think sometimes, if I'm just being honest and I'm just talking from the heart here, I think sometimes the church leads people to think that because we see how people make mistakes and how people fall in the church and are immediately kind of cast aside, they're removed from all their positions and not really told or encouraged to try anything else, that because of that, they just step away. And they think that, God can't use me because the church doesn't want me. But what we see in this case is that even in our failures, God is offering forgiveness. He is offering restoration. Now, that may mean our ministry looks different going forward, and how God uses us is going to be maybe different than how we thought God was going to use us. But it doesn't mean that our role in the church and our role in the kingdom has been diminished completely. Let's keep going in our study. Let's look at verses 18 and 19. I want you to think of how God used Peter after this conversation. Picking up in verse 18, it says this. It says, "Truly I tell you, when you were younger, you would tie your belt and walk wherever you wanted. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will tie you and carry you where you don't want to go." He said this to indicate what kind of death Peter would glorify God. After saying this, he told him, "Follow me." Now, this is just such a neat and powerful passage. The book kind of wants us to focus in on what Jesus meant by the stretching out of his arms. Church tradition tends to lead us to believe that this is a reference to Peter being crucified. We know from church tradition that Peter was crucified upside down. I do think, regardless of this, there's an aspect to this where when Peter was young, he was in control of his own life. And he could get up in the morning, he could dress himself, and he could do what he wanted to do. He got up, he went to work, he went fishing, he mended his nets. He decided what he did and when and where and how, and he had this total freedom. But he's saying, when you grow older, you won't have that freedom anymore. And I think between both the term stretching out his arms and having his arms tied imply that in Peter's future, he is going to lose his freedom, more than likely losing his freedom in a form of persecution. He is going to be arrested. And I do think that this is me talking. I do think this is most certainly a reference to a future crucifixion and a future death or martyrdom, because he is going to go where he does not want to go, and that is going to ultimately be his death. He's looking on the book. He says, we don't have historical proof of this, but we know that Peter died as a martyr because of his faith. We don't really have good documentation, historical evidence of how Jesus died apart from church tradition. Now, we have a very consistent church tradition as it relates to what happened to Peter, even if we don't have those other things. The book then asks this question: would knowing that you would be a martyr for Christ cause you joy or anxiety? And I'm interested to hear what you would have to say about that. So pause the video, take a couple minutes, and give me a little bit of a why. Would finding out that you were going to die as a martyr for Christ, would that bring you joy or anxiety, and why? Take a couple minutes, pause the video, and then we'll discuss that a little bit. All right, I would love to know what you said. I would challenge you, if you're feeling particularly brave, leave your answer to this question in the comments, whether you're on Facebook or on YouTube. I'd love to see those. The difference, the word martyr comes from the Greek word that means a witness or a testifier of this thing. And so martyrdom was really understood to be a testimony or a witness of your faith and your conviction over a particular thing. In our case, over the resurrection of Jesus Christ. When we talk about being martyred for our faith in the Christian church, what we're saying is our confidence is so strong that Jesus is the Christ and that He rose from the grave, that we are willing to die in order for you to understand that we believe Jesus is alive, which I think is a beautiful thing. And that question of would you be joyful or anxious, I'm sure the classic Sunday school answer is it depends. I would love to think that I would be joyful, that God was going to use me in such a way that my life, and even more importantly, that my death would be a testimony of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and that God could use that to lead other people to Christ. I would love to think that's how I would respond, but I'm not sure that's how I would respond in the moment. I'm not afraid of being dead, but I'm a little nervous about dying. And depending on how that martyrdom is going to be, what that's going to look like, I would be very, very scared or very anxious to know that I am going to endure some sort of pain, that I'm going to leave my family without a husband and a father. That would be really tough for me. So I would much rather die a martyr's death than die a meaningless death, whatever that might be. But it would still be a very anxious thing to know that my life was going to come to an end, not by old age or by some other thing, but that I was going to die the death of a martyr. That would be a tough thing. So I can see kind of the tension there, and I'm not sure. I think the concept of it would be appealing, but the reality of it would be very frightening. The book goes on to say this. It says, sometimes in difficult conversations we're tempted to change the subject. Jesus had given Peter some hard truths, and Jesus would not let him shift gears. Let's look at verses 20 through 23, and I want you to identify how Peter changes the subject. Picking up in 23, we see this. In 20, we see this. It says, so Peter turned around and saw the disciple Jesus loved following them. The one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and asked, Lord, who is the one who's going to betray you? When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, Lord, what about him? And he said, if I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? As for you, follow me. Though this rumor spread to the brothers and sisters that the disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not tell him that he would not die, but if I wanted him to remain until I come, what is that to you? And so I love this because it just give you an idea of people are people. This to me is a big callback all the way to John 4 with the woman at the well, where Jesus is talking with her and he finally says, go get your husband. I don't have a husband. You rightly say you don't have a husband because you've had 3 husbands or however many it is, and the one you're living with now is not your husband. And she responds with, oh, so I see that you're a prophet. Let me ask you a question. and there's that like changing of gears, like that try to shift of the focus. Like, let's not talk about my life. Let's talk about this abstract theological thing. In the same sense, Peter's going, he's just been told, I need you to feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. Oh, by the way, when you were younger, you did what you wanted to do. You had ultimate freedom in your life, but moving forward, you are moving on to martyrdom, and you are going to do that for my sake. And he's like, but what about him? What's going to happen to him? And is trying to shift that focus away from Peter and from his call. And the only reason I bring that up is it is such a reminder that people are people. And whether it's a Samaritan woman or a Jewish man or an American man or woman, even in the 23rd century or 21st century, it could go to the future, even now, the reality is we haven't changed. And we still want to shift focus. We still want to get the eyes off of us when we're uncomfortable. We still respond in this way. And so Peter and Jesus are clearly walking along, because it points out that this disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. That was John, the author of our text. And they're moving along, and he realizes that John is following them, and he shifts this statement to, well, what about this guy? What's going to happen to him? And Jesus does not play this game at all. It doesn't matter what's happening to him. And I want to challenge you in that same regard. God is calling you to contribute to the kingdom of God. You have a purpose and a role and a reason to be a part of the church. God is calling you into being a functioning member of the church. And whether God calls you to be in the church for a week or for a lifetime, it doesn't matter. God has a call for you. And it doesn't matter how he's called anyone else. You don't get to judge other people if they have a different gifting and a different calling. Now, they need to be faithful to that calling. And we need to encourage and enable and equip people to be faithful to the calling that God's given them. But we don't get to do this comparison game to say, like, I am more used by God, I am better used by God than another person. That's not how it works, especially in the church. The book says this, it says, what was Jesus' ultimate command to Peter? And the answer, and we've heard it twice in our passage, and I think it's so huge, is the answer is follow me. It's not about what other people do. It's not about what traditions are. There's not about what's comfortable or what's uncomfortable. The command that Jesus gives Peter, and I believe that Jesus gives to every person, is follow me. Come after me. Follow me. The book asks this question, it's what are the dangers of comparing ourselves to other believers? And then I want to also ask the follow-up to that, which is how do we stay focused on Jesus' call on our own life? Pause the video, take a couple of minutes to discuss that, and then we'll start to wrap up our study. All right, the initial question was, what are the dangers of comparing ourselves to other believers? The book points these out. It says, pride, distractions, judgment, or a judgmental spirit, doubts, and so forth are all things that are the dangers of playing this comparison game. I know for myself, I serve at a church. I'm on staff here at Tunnel Hill as the pastor. It is very tempting to begin to compare myself to other pastors in the area and their ministries in their church. And it can lead to feelings of tremendous inadequacy as you look at other churches that are maybe newer churches, younger churches, ones that have just hit the scene and already have not just a few more members than us, but literally hundreds, if not thousands more people attending their church on a regular basis. That's something like you can take a step back and go, well, what's wrong with me? Why do they run to this church when I barely see a trickle of people coming into our church, and it can make me feel very inadequate, maybe that I'm doing something wrong or whatever it might be. But then on the flip side of that, if I see a church that's not doing as well, or if there's something going on in a church that I don't like, it is so easy for me to start becoming judgmental and for lack of better words, pompous and arrogant that we're doing everything right and that these other churches are doing everything wrong. And so, 10 times out of 10, when I play the comparison game, I lose. And whether I lose because I feel bad and I feel useless, or I lose because I am arrogant and I'm missing the point of my existence and to worship God, either way I lose. And that's a danger. So the question is, how do we focus on Jesus' call for our life? And, I think that's in the command that he gives us. We are called to follow him. And so the way we stay focused is we follow him. We pray, we get into the word, we look for needs in the church, and we find ways that we can not only be a part of the church community, but how we can create church community in our church and in our circles of influence. And in all those things, we keep our focus on Jesus and what he has called us to do through his word and not on what other people are doing. That would be my suggestion to you. The last thing the book says is this. It says, God has a personal plan for both Peter and John. Both were important for the kingdom. God also has a personal plan for each of us. We should focus on our personal obedience. As we fulfill our calling, the kingdom grows stronger and other believers are encouraged. What's more, the world will see our love for Jesus and be drawn to him. And so I want to leave you with this kind of question and this challenge. I want you to ask kind of yourself the question, what is God calling me to do to serve him? How is God calling me to follow him? And I want you to answer this question specifically. I don't want you to say, God's just calling me to be a good Christian. Now, you might say God's calling me to be a good mother to these children, but then even that, I want to ask you, how? And here's what I want you to do. I want you to really think about that. How is God calling me to follow him? I want you to get specific with it, and then I want you to pray over it. I want you to thoroughly pray, especially if the answer is, I don't know. And that's okay. But I want you to pray over it and say, God, how are you calling me specifically to follow you, to feed your lambs, to tend your flock, to feed your sheep? How are you calling me specifically to follow you? I want you to pray about that, and then as God reveals what that might be and meditate on that throughout the week, as God begins to reveal that, do something. Don't worry about other people. Don't worry about what God's calling your spouse or other people to do. What is God calling you to do? Pray about it, and then ask yourself, what steps do I need to take in order to bring that into fruition, to make that happen? That's what we want you to do to close out this time. How is God calling you specifically? Pray over that, and then we encourage you to join us for worship right here at Tunnel Hill Baptist Church, 11 o'clock, both in person and online through Facebook Live. Thank you so much for joining us today. God bless.